Do you like to travel? It's something that lots of us do every day. If we're not going very far, walking or riding a bike will be fine, but for longer journeys we would soon feel tired. The most common way for people to get to where they want to go is by car, and whether you're travelling to school, going on your holidays, doing the supermarket shopping or visiting your friends and relations, it's very convenient indeed. But there are plenty of other ways to travel, especially if you live in a big city where it can be quite difficult to park a car. Travelling by bus can be really good fun, especially if the weather is nice. There are still some places where you can find double-decker buses, and you will get a lovely view if you go to the top. Sometimes you will find open-top buses in big cities, and this is a great way to go sightseeing. Buses are described as being public transport. This means that anyone can travel to wherever the bus is going. There are bus timetables so you can plan your journey, and many people go to work, school or college by bus every day. Now, if you don't want to travel by bus on public transport, there is another option, which is to go on a train journey. Have you ever been on a train? It's very interesting, and if you have to travel a long way, the best thing is that you can get up and walk around. Quite often there are tables between the seats, so you can play games or colour in pictures, and if you get hungry or thirsty, there's usually a buffet where you can buy food and drink. There are even some trains that have sleeping compartments in case you are travelling overnight, and these are especially useful if you are going further than mainland Britain by train. This might sound very strange because I'm sure you know that Britain, made up of England, Scotland and Wales, is an island which isn't connected to any other country by land and is surrounded by the sea. Although Northern Ireland is part of Great Britain, it lies across the Irish Sea, and to get there you have to either travel by ferry or aeroplane. but take a closer look at the map of Great Britain and you can see that it's only separated from the rest of Europe by the English Channel between this country and France. You can travel to the continent by ferry, just like going to Northern Ireland, or by aeroplane. But did you know you can get on a train in London and travel to Calais in France without getting wet? This is because there is a tunnel that actually runs underneath the sea and the train travels all the way through. So you see, train journeys can be very exciting indeed. Do you like stories about trains? There are lots. I expect you can all think of a favourite. If you've read the Harry Potter books or seen the films, you will know that Harry went to school by train. The steam locomotive always departed from platform 9 3/4 at a big London station called King's Cross. Although this is where the scenes for the film were shot, you'll not find Harry's magic platform, unless of course you're a witch or a wizard. But the lady who wrote the Harry Potter books, called Joanne Rowling, was actually thinking of another big London station called Euston when she was working on her Harry Potter series. If you come to London, these stations are very interesting and you may even get to have a ride on an underground train. In London, the traffic is very busy and you can spend a lot of time stuck in traffic jams, but the underground trains can get from one place to another with no problem at all. If you remember what this sign looks like, you'll know that wherever you see it above ground, you'll find a train station underground. There is another film that you might have seen called The Railway Children, but it is quite old. This film was shot here at the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, and today lots of people come to visit here and ride on the trains. But have you noticed something? When you go to the station nearest to where you live and perhaps travel to London or another big city, the kind of locomotive you will travel by will be nothing like the beautiful steam train we've just been looking at. Today, lots of trains are powered by diesel, which is a fuel that is like petrol, while others run on electricity. However, if you ask your grandparents about trains when they were young, they will probably remember steam locomotives being the most widely used. Now, modern trains are wonderful if you want to get to where you're going quickly, but if you're having a special day out on the train, finding somewhere to travel by steam can make your journey all the more enjoyable. And to really make the most of the experience, let's find out how the railways got started. We actually have to go back a long time in history to find out when the first railways were built, and this exciting journey will take us below ground once again. This is a mine deep under the ground where a long time ago people used to dig for something called iron ore. There are other mines where people used to dig for coal or tin, but whatever there was to be found, it was always very heavy to carry and hard work for the men who had to transport their wares to the surface. Then, about 500 years ago, somebody had a wonderful idea. If you laid down wooden planks, you could push a wagon along a track. Miners could collect all the iron ore, coal or tin, and then push the full carts along, rather than make lots of trips up and down the workings, transporting whatever they had taken from the ground. It wasn't long before the people who worked above ground also thought this was a good idea, especially when they had to carry heavy loads. The first railway, or wagonway as it was then called, was built in 1604 and it ran for just 2 miles. Even so, this was quite a long distance to push, and horses were introduced to pull the wagons instead. Nevertheless, it was still very hard work, and the loads started to get heavier and heavier. Also, transporting goods from one part of the country to another became really important, and a very clever man came up with another good idea to make life an awful lot easier. Have you ever had a toy boat or plastic duck to play with in your bath? Well, they float, don't they? And you only have to give a little push with your finger for your toys to float away. This clever man, called James Brindley, realised that if you made a special boat to carry heavy weights, it would float on the water. People had been transporting things by boat on rivers and across the sea for thousands of years, but if you wanted to carry your goods to somewhere the river didn't flow, it wasn't much help. So James Brindley built waterways all over the country, which needed special narrow boats to carry people's heavy goods. Perhaps you've been lucky enough to go on a narrow boating holiday. It's such good fun, and you get to see the beautiful countryside, but you do travel very slowly indeed. This was a time in history when clever people were always trying to think up better and faster ways to do things, and when steam engines started to become available, how everyone carried heavy goods and travelled was changed dramatically. Have you ever watched a kettle boil and seen something called steam rising? Steam is very, very hot, and you need to keep well away from it, but it can also be very useful, especially when you want to power an engine. And that's precisely what a man called George Stephenson decided he wanted to do. George Stephenson realised that if you could run an engine by steam along a railway track, just like the ones used by the wagons and horses, it would be possible to pull the wagons by steam power instead. To make steam, he needed coal and water, but that was all. By burning a coal fire, there was enough heat to boil the water and make steam, which made the engine run. Lots of people thought that George Stephenson was crazy, but when he built a locomotive called the rocket, he proved just what a good idea it was. Soon steam locomotives were running all over the country, as fast as the railway tracks could be laid. At first, they were only used to carry heavy things for industry, but it wasn't long before people wanted to travel by train as well. Suddenly, the canals seemed very slow by comparison and were almost forgotten about. In fact, because the canals followed the fastest routes between cities and towns, the railways were often laid alongside the canals, and you might go on a train journey where you will be able to see a canal through the window while you travel. You will probably overtake any narrowboat on the canal at great speed, even if you're having a ride on a steam locomotive rather than a faster modern train. When George Stephenson was building his railways in the north of England to begin with, he worked out how wide the wagons pulled by the horses were, and that's how far apart his tracks were laid. But George Stephenson wasn't the only person who was good at building railways. In the south of England, a man with a very grand-sounding name, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, was also learning all about the railways. Brunel was an amazing engineer who could make just about anything, like this beautiful suspension bridge at Clifton and this wonderful steamship called the SS Great Britain that you can still go and visit today in Bristol. Now, when it came to doing his sums, Isambard Kingdom Brunel was very clever, and rather than use George Stephenson's calculations for railway tracks the width of old farm wagons, Brunel worked out the most stable railway line width, which was much wider, and laid tracks and had trains made bigger all over the south of England. This was all very well until the railway lines from the north and the south met at stations, because all the heavy goods had to be taken off one train and put on another, and as you can imagine, there were lots of arguments about which engineer was right. Eventually the government had to decide, and they chose George Stephenson's railway width, which they called standard gauge. Isambard Kingdom Brunel had to change all his railway lines from his broad gauge to standard gauge. So now if you hear people talking about standard gauge when you go to visit a steam railway, you'll know they mean the width of the track. Once all the railways used the same track, trains could run from one end of the country to the other, and steam locomotives got faster and faster. Diesel engines didn't really take over until the 1960s, and although train travel became even faster, lots of people still preferred the steam trains because they had so much character. And then something amazing happened. When lots of the steam locomotives had been sent to the scrapyards and many railway lines out in the countryside had been closed down, Groups of railway enthusiasts join together to create steam societies to restore the old disused track, stations, goods sheds, locomotives and carriages so that they could become a very special attraction for people to visit. There are many steam societies all over the country, and they are very different depending on their location. I think it's about time we went to visit one of these very special railways, don't you? To start off with, we'll travel to a place called Toddington, where you can find out about all sorts of different steam locomotives and visit some very beautiful places in a part of Great Britain called the Cotswolds. This is the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway, and we've arrived very early in the morning to see all the preparations for a busy day with trains running for the visitors. It actually takes quite a long time to get the coal fires burning properly to make enough steam, but it looks to me as if everybody's thoroughly enjoying themselves. Did you know some people come and work on the steam trains and learn how to drive a locomotive as a special treat? If you have someone in your family that really loves steam trains, you can give them a day out learning to drive one as a birthday present. But you might need to save up because it would cost quite a lot of pocket money. Today there are going to be 2 steam locomotives running, so let's take a closer look. Steam engines have a series of numbers and sometimes names as well, and if you'd like to know, this one is Great Western Railway Collet 060 3205 and was built in Swindon, where many locomotives originated from, and it's over 60 years old. The other locomotive that will be in steam today is a very well-known engine called Black Prince, also built in Swindon, but not quite as old as 3205. Now, while we're waiting for there to be enough steam, we can find lots of other interesting locomotives to look at that are being restored. This locomotive, 2807, is more than 100 years old, and a group of enthusiasts have been working very hard on the restoration, but as you can see, they've still got a long way to go. It's hard to believe, but this engine travelled more than 1.5 million miles before being taken out of service, which was a very long way indeed. Perhaps if you come to visit the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway, you'll be able to find 2807 and see how much progress has been made, although it will probably be a long time before you see this locomotive pulling carriages along the track. One thing you will notice straight away when you come to visit a steam railway is just how big some of the locomotives are. If we go into the goods shed, which has its very own track running through, we'll find a really enormous steam engine that is being restored. This is Merchant Navy 36006 P&O SNC, and it has already taken 15 years to restore to this stage. It shouldn't be too long though before this locomotive will pull out of the goods shed in full steam, which will be a spectacular sight to see. But for now it looks as if 3205 and Black Prince are almost ready to begin the day's work, and it's starting to get very noisy with lots of steam. However, at the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway there truly is something for everyone. Not all railway enthusiasts concentrate on steam engines. There are lots who like the early diesels just as much. This one is nearly as old as Black Prince and is very interesting indeed, especially as we've been able to get a real close-up look at how it all works. What's really good when you come to a steam railway like this one is you can stay all day long and ride on as many different trains as you want to. So if you look at the timetables and plan your journeys carefully, you can try them all. If you go all the way from Toddington to the end of the line at Cheltenham, it would be a 20-mile round trip. So let's climb aboard with the engine driver of 3205 and see what it's like to ride on a steam locomotive. We're starting off from a little Cotswold village called Gotherington, and the station has been restored just as carefully as the trains and the tracks. Back aboard our wonderful steam locomotive, the fireman is working hard to keep the boiler stoked with coal, and we're racing through the lovely countryside. Because the Cotswolds are actually a range of hills, at one point on this line there is a long tunnel which takes the trains through the hillside. It's always great fun to go through a tunnel on a steam train, even though it looks a bit dark as you go in. As well as looking after the tunnel, the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway also takes care of another station along the tracks at a place called Winchcombe. It's lovely to look at today, but when this steam society started, there was nothing here but a pile of old rubble where the station house now stands. Although it took a lot of hard work, this building was brought here from another station that was closing and rebuilt brick by brick. It must have been very exciting, and if you didn't tell the visitors what had happened, I don't think anyone would notice this wasn't the original station house, which just goes to show what a good job the restorers did. After Winchcombe, it's just a short journey back to Toddington, and you might be wondering what Black Prince has been doing all day. Well, as the dusk is falling and all the beautiful station lamps have been lit, a small crowd has gathered to watch out for this great locomotive's return. Some very lucky people have been learning how to drive a train on Black Prince today, and it looks to me as if they've done very well indeed. We've had a really fantastic day out in the Cotswolds, and as everyone goes home for tea, I'm sure it won't be too long until they'll be ready to visit another steam railway. Have you ever travelled by train to go on your holidays? It can be very exciting, even if it isn't on a steam train. Now, do you remember Isambard Kingdom Brunel? Well, if you go to the seaside in the southwest of England by train, chances are you'll still travel along the railway lines he had built all those years ago. And if you go on the line from Bristol to Plymouth, you'll be in for an extra special treat. For quite a bit of the journey, you'll ride along a railway track right next to the sea, and the view is amazing. But that's not all. When you get to Plymouth, if you're going on to Cornwall, you will cross this bridge. And can you see a name on it? That's right. Isambard Kingdom Brunel built this bridge a very long time ago. If you look carefully, you can see trains travelling backwards and forwards across it, and the bridge hasn't needed too much repair work in well over 100 years, proving just how good Brunel's design must have been in the first place. Today, most people go on holiday in this country by car. But when the railway was the quickest way that families who didn't have cars could travel, the holiday trains were very busy indeed. Just look at this old film of trains on the Isle of Wight. People came over by ferry on a short stretch of water called the Solent and caught the train on the pier to take them to their holiday destinations. It must have been very exciting, and although it's not as busy as this anymore, the Isle of Wight is still a lovely place to visit, especially if you happen to like steam trains. There was a time, and not all that long ago, when the railway on the Isle of Wight went everywhere. But just like on the mainland, as more and more people started to travel by car, the railway lines to all but the biggest towns were closed. Here's some more old film of holidaymakers arriving in the beautiful seaside resort of Ventnor in the south part of the island. What a wonderful tunnel this must have been to go through, but this is what it looks like today. The entrance is all boarded up and there are no trains running into Ventnor. But if you travel to another lovely place called Haven Street, you'll find plenty of steam locomotives to enjoy. Now, when you arrive at the Isle of Wight Steam Railway at Haven Street, there is just so much to see, you might wonder quite where to begin. But all this started because a group of schoolboys really loved steam engines, and they got together and actually bought a locomotive that wasn't going to be used anymore. It really is quite an incredible story, and this is the locomotive in question, called Carlborn. Much older than anything we saw at the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway, Carlborn was built in 1891 at Nine Elms in England and came into service on the Isle of Wight in 1925. The man that you see so hard at work, getting ready for all the visitors today, is called Ken, and he really is a very special person, because for many of the years that Carlborn ran on the Isle of Wight Railway, carrying holidaymakers wherever they wanted to go, Ken was the driver. When all the railway lines were electrified, Ken was very sad that he wouldn't be driving Carlborn anymore. Nevertheless, he continued to drive the new electric trains until his retirement. Then something really wonderful happened. After Ken retired, he came to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, which had grown from just a single locomotive to include the tracks, station and buildings that you see here today, as a volunteer. And can you guess what Ken discovered? Yes, That's right, he found his favourite steam engine, Carlborn, in perfect working order. For Ken, it was like being reunited with an old friend, and the pair was soon working together again, very happily indeed. If you want to know the details, Carlborn is a London and South West Railway Class 02 locomotive, and since being on the Isle of Wight is numbered W24. While Ken's finishing off his last-minute checks before Carlborn's first journey of the day, we can have a good look around. Every steam railway that you visit will be different, and here at the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, they haven't only got a wonderful collection of classic locomotives, they've also restored some very special carriages as well. These carriages date back to the time of Queen Victoria, and they have been very carefully restored. Because they're really precious, the Victorian carriages are only used for very special occasions, and they have also appeared in quite a lot of films. As well as looking at all the rolling stock, the buildings here are very well cared for too. This signal box is in perfect working order, and it's really interesting to watch the controls being operated. It's very important that the signalman knows which levers to pull so that there aren't any train crashes, and as this one definitely knows what he's doing, we're in very safe hands today. When you go to visit a steam railway, if you like collecting model trains or railway souvenirs, it's always worth looking out for the gift shop. Because they're run by railway enthusiasts, you'll find some marvellous treasures to help you remember your lovely day out. And as so many of the young visitors haven't got a lot of money to spend, you'll find plenty of things you can afford to buy with your pocket money. After all that looking around, if you're hungry and thirsty, there will usually be a very nice station cafe to stop at. But for now, we'd better get ourselves moving. We've got a train to catch. Haven Street Station is in the middle of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, and for the first part of our journey we're going to travel in an easterly direction to Smallbrook Junction, where we can begin our train ride properly, all the way to the end of the line today, at Wootton in the west. It's quite interesting because this is the only way to get to Smallbrook Junction, as there's no road or even a footpath. And if you want to catch the modern-day electric train, which runs from Ryde to Shanklin, you can change trains here, but you'd be in for quite a surprise. If you've been to London and travelled on the Underground, you'll have seen trains like these before, because that's where they've come from. But that's a journey for another day, because we're more interested in Carlborn, just like all the people here who are watching this wonderful locomotive get in position, ready to set off again in the opposite direction. Oh, look! We must be ready to go. The guard has blown his whistle and lowered his flag. We're off, and it's full steam ahead. Now what's going on here? We seem to have come to a halt. And I don't just mean that we've stopped. This is Ashy Halt, which means that people can wave their hand to request the train stops and picks them up. As you can see, we've come back to Haven Street, and there are lots more people out and about now, enjoying themselves. The last leg of our train ride takes us through some lovely wooded countryside to Wootton, and the walkers can get off the train and make their way home. But we're not quite finished yet. We're going on a mystery tour to find a house that used to be a station a long time ago. We'll take a little walk down the footpath, and look, you can see where a platform would once have stood, and this station, called Whippingham, was used by a very special person. Queen Victoria and her very large family used to come to the Isle of Wight for their holidays, and she really loved it here. Not far away you will find Osborne House, which is very grand, and this is where the royal family used to stay. And just like so many other holidaymakers on the Isle of Wight, they used to come by train, and what we've just been looking at was their own private station. Can you imagine having your own station complete with a train to take you wherever you wanted to go? And by the look of this old picture of Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert, they certainly knew how to travel in style. As we return to Wootton to catch Colborne's last run of the day, we can watch Ken and this remarkable locomotive disappear off into the distance. We've had an amazing time and learnt a lot more about railways, but we've still got another very different steam society to go and visit, so we need to head back to the ferry and cross the Solent in search of a huge forest. Welcome to the beautiful Forest of Dean, which can be found on the border between England and Wales. Do you like to go walking in the woods and forests? It can be great fun, and if you take a picnic with you, you can spend a whole day enjoying being in a forest like this one. If you come in the springtime, the bluebells are lovely, and it's as if the forest floor has been covered in a carpet of blue. It's a wonderful place to come if you want to find out more about trees. This wonderful English oak is called the forest giant, and I expect you can guess why. Hundreds of years ago, people used to have to make almost everything they needed out of wood, and forests were very important indeed. Now, as we already know, Great Britain is an island nation, and way back in history, when countries were always fighting wars with each other, any attacks would come by sea, using big sailing ships. Have you heard of a king called Henry VIII? That's right, the one who had 6 wives. But he's really just as famous for building ships out of wood for the British Navy. One of his ships was called the Mary Rose, but she sank in the Solent way back in 1545. Do you remember the Solent, the short stretch of water between England and the Isle of Wight that we saw earlier? Well, ships from France were attempting to invade the Isle of Wight, and there was a huge sea battle in the Solent. Although nobody knows for sure why the Mary Rose sank, she lay deep beneath the sea until 1982, when the wreck was raised, and the remains can now be seen in a Portsmouth museum. Now, as you can imagine, people needed an awful lot of trees to build big ships. Just take a look at this one called the Victory, which, although not quite as old as the Mary Rose, is still in one piece at the historic docks in Portsmouth. Many believe that both the Mary Rose and the Victory were built from trees that came from the Forest of Dean. The kings and queens needed forests like this one that we're visiting now to build their ships, and to this day it's still sometimes called the Royal Forest of Dean. It actually lies close to the very important port of Bristol, where many ships were once built, so the timber would not have had to be carried too far. Railways would have come in very useful had they been invented sooner, but the Dean Forest Railway, in the heart of the Royal Forest of Dean, is actually the oldest of all the railways to be visited in this programme, as it first ran with wagons and horses in 1809. Nevertheless, the railway wasn't built here because of what grew above the ground. It was more to do with what people uncovered below it. We saw this iron ore mine a little earlier on, and it can be found deep beneath the Forest of Dean, and with coal and limestone also discovered close by, there was a big demand from industrial centres all over the country for these vital natural resources. The railway through the Forest of Dean could carry coal and iron ore from the mines directly to wherever it was needed, and this was once a very busy railway indeed. But today, early in the morning, at the Dean Forest Railway, all seems quiet and peaceful. This is Norchard, the railway's headquarters, and just as there were at the other steam societies we've visited, there are some great things to see. There used to be a large colliery here and then a power station, but they've long since gone, and like so many of Britain's steam railways, there would be nothing left at all if it hadn't been for railway enthusiasts. Although the buildings, platforms, tracks and signals have all been painstakingly restored, the majority of people come here because they want to see steam locomotives in action. And here at the Dean Forest Railway, nobody will ever be disappointed. This steam locomotive looks quite different to the ones we've been watching at the other railways because it has a pannier tank. There are box-shaped tanks attached to the sides of the boiler, which gives the engine its distinctive appearance, although it does work on exactly the same principles. Everyone here is busy stoking up the fire with coal to get things started. And there's also plenty of cleaning and polishing going on, ready for when the visitors arrive a little bit later in the day. There are lots of people, sometimes called train spotters, who like to collect the numbers of all the trains that they see. And if you'd like to know, this locomotive is Forest Pannier 9681. But in terms of preserved steam engines, it's not terribly old, having been built at Swindon in 1949. Even so, when many branch lines were closed and diesel trains became more economical to use, Forest Pannier 9681 was sent for scrap. It's hard to believe, looking at this beautiful engine today, that for 10 years it rusted and rotted in a Welsh scrapyard. The Forest Pannier Tank Fund then came to the rescue in 1975 after raising what was then the huge sum of £3,600 to buy this wonderful engine. When 9681 arrived at Norchard, there was a great deal of work to be done, but 9 years later all the effort proved worthwhile as the newly nicknamed Black Beauty returned to the tracks in full steam, just like you see here today. We've gone to the furthest point along the line, to Lydney Junction, which leads on to Lydney Docks. This old postcard shows you how this harbour would have looked when coal and iron ore from the Forest of Dean used to be transported all around the world, but today it's not used very much at all. However, the station box just the other side of the level crossing gates is very busy indeed. Like all the steam railways we've visited in this programme, all the people who operate it are volunteers, and as Brian sends Forest Pannier 9681 safely on her way, all the travellers are very happy, enjoying their special journey. Do you remember Ashy Halt on the Isle of Wight steam railway, where the walkers asked the train to stop? Well, there's one on this line too, called St Mary's Halt, because it's right next to St Mary's Church. By the time we get back to Norchard, quite a crowd has gathered, and there are lots of children who want to take a closer look, and some are talking to the driver. Everybody's always very friendly because they're railway enthusiasts who really enjoy being volunteers. So do remember, if you go to visit a steam railway anywhere in Britain, you can ask as many questions as you like, because they'll be sure to know the answers. And even if you don't go to visit a steam railway, next time you travel by train, you'll have lots of things to be looking out for. Bridges are very interesting and can be really old, like Isambard Kingdom Brunel's railway bridge between Devon and Cornwall. Stations might appear to be quite modern, but if you look a little more closely, chances are there will be older parts of the buildings that are very interesting, so make sure you keep your eyes open. Tunnels are always fascinating too, like the one we went through on the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway. But this one is even more spectacular, and modern trains run through it every day. George Stephenson built Summit Tunnel, which is cut deep into the Pennine Hills. People were very frightened of travelling through when it first opened, but George Stephenson promised they would be safe. And he was right. Summit Tunnel has been in use for more than 150 years without any problems, and of all the travellers who pass this way every day, I wonder how many people know how special Summit Tunnel really is. Sadly, our time enjoying these wonderful train journeys is coming to an end. We've seen so many remarkable locomotives like Black Prince on the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway, Culborn on the Isle of Wight line, and last but not least the delightful Black Beauty, Forest Pannier 9681. It just goes to show that travelling on the train is much more than just a journey. It's a real adventure that everyone can enjoy.